I'm going to start again tonight, kind of where I started when I first opened. It seems like a long time ago. It seems longer than a couple days. Just coming back again to the beauty of holiness and how we experience beauty and what the way Jesus wants to encounter us in the powerful beauty. It's an otherworldly experience. And I just want to share a really amazing experience I had a couple years ago. My daughter, for my birthday, took me to a Diana Krall jazz concert. Very, very different than a CD. I mean, her group, her musicians were phenomenal. I have all her CDs. It didn't sound anything like those. It was amazing. And what it felt like to me was that it was an offering. It was an invitation into the intimate, delicious intimacies and intricacies of the musicians' personal joy in making music together. Anybody know what jazz is? They got this thing going on, and they're really into it. It's making them really happy, and you just get to listen in. They didn't hurl. It wasn't that kind of a concert where they just and all the people in the audience are freaking out and everything. It wasn't like that at all. It was a very different experience, like the splashing and all this. It wasn't that. It was an invitation. And we were in this huge theater. It was an invitation to participate in their fellowship, in their delight, in their beauty. And it was, for me personally, and you got to know me a little bit, I'm kind of weird, I'm a 4. I know that's a big surprise to you. It was an encounter with the otherworldly for me. And we were drawn into beauty. It was like a fourth dimension. And a couple times during the concert, I turned to my daughter, I said, "What is happening right now?" And she said, "I don't know." It was that kind of an experience. It was like an unknown language. The talent was so exquisite. And even though I don't have any ability whatsoever to understand jazz, I don't get it. That jazz language, I was met by it. And I was encountered by it. The union of those 5 musicians was their own. Their music was the fruit of their joy. And it was offered to me. I listened in, I tasted, I was transported, and I was overwhelmed. And when the concert was over, I was so upset. I thought, how? We paid like lots of money for these tickets. It was like 40 minutes. And I looked at my watch, it had been over 2 hours. It was like time just evaporated. What I'm describing to you is Trinitarian reality. Did you hear the similarities? The triune God, their love relationship, their language, their life, their reality. And they are inviting us to listen in, to participate. I believe beauty is an incarnation of the eternal, transcendent world. The Trinity is beauty. Holiness is beauty. And triune communication, we talked about that, it's probably music. God is always speaking within his own being. And what is spoken, his voice, it's available to us. He's available to us. always. And it is the joy of the fruit of the triune union. And the wonder of wonders is he invites us to his concert. It's free. His beauty is always available for us to hear. This is the thing. It's free, but it isn't. It's costly. Okay? Just like a ticket to the Deepak Theater is costly, and for those musicians, it was a lifetime of sacrifice, right? To practice, to become like that. To hear him, to hear his voice, we have to rise early, like Moses. We got to go up that mountain. Is it worth it? Takes some effort, right? We talked about diligence. Was that the word today? Yeah. We need to spend time. We need to make our priorities. What are we going to push out? Because he is our first priority. We only have so much time. And we will be consumed in his fire. He will consume us. We will belong to him. He will take us, and he will make us the way he wants us to be, with his fire that Bill talked about. And then he's going to send us, and we get to be like him, which means we get to die to ourselves for the sake of the world. And he will always draw us into his joy. And there will be mind-blowing intimacies. You think that concert was mind-blowing? Wait until you hear his voice, the things he wants to say and do. And we have this weekend, haven't we? We have. And there's a divine satisfaction that we receive from that, and it leaves us yearning for more. More, please, more. So the question is, will we listen? Will we join him? He's waiting for us. He's always available. So let's listen as I read some of his words to us. Psalm 103. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget none of his benefits, who pardons all your iniquities, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with loving kindness and compassion, who satisfies your desire with good things, so that your youth is renewed like the eagle. The Lord performs righteous deeds and judgments for all who are oppressed. He made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the sons of Israel. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness. That's what he whispered to Moses when Moses went up the mountain. Remember, he said, I want to see your glory. And God said, oh, that might not be so good, but I'll let you see my goodness. And he hid him in the cleft of the rock, and he revealed to him his nature. And did he say, I'm sovereign, I'm righteous? He said, I am compassionate. These are his words, he whispers. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness. He will not always strive with us, nor will he keep his anger forever. He has not dealt with us according to our sins or rewarded us according to our iniquities. He does not give us what we deserve. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his loving kindness toward those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. Just as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. For he himself knows what we are made of. He is mindful that we are but dust. How does he know? He became us. He took on dust. He wrapped himself in our clay and he's full of compassion for us. I'm going to read a couple other stories in Luke around this healing idea. This one, in Psalm 103, he is the one who is here in these stories, in these chapters, healing people. Luke 5. There's so many of them. So it's a Sabbath day. Luke, let's see, even Luke 4:38. He got up, left the synagogue. It was a Sabbath day, and he healed Peter's mother-in-law. And then verse 12 of chapter 5. While he was in one of the cities, behold, there was a man covered with leprosy. This word covered is not accurate. It actually means full of leprosy. There are different kinds of leprosy. There's this, like a thing on the surface. There's a degree of leprosy that's a little different. This kind of leprosy is to the bone. It's all the way in to the essence of the guy's complete physical being. And sometimes I think about some of the things that we're dealing with. And in Scripture, leprosy is quite often metaphorically used for sin, for deep sin. And I think about some of the things that we have gotten ourselves into, like sexual addiction. That goes to the bone. That feels as helpless as it gets. Now picture this guy. Let's just change this to sexual addiction. Full of leprosy, incapable, doomed. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and implored him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. You do not touch lepers. But God did. Touched him and said, I am willing, be cleansed. Somebody here needs to hear that. Jesus is willing, and he can cleanse you. He can, and he will. And immediately the leprosy left him. And then right after that is when the paralytic comes, and his friends lower him down into the house. And it says in verse 17, the power of the Lord was present for Jesus to perform healing. I thought that was a really fascinating sentence. And it says they were trying to bring him in to set him down in front of Jesus, but they couldn't find a way to bring him in because of the crowd. And they went up on the roof and let him down through the tiles with his stretcher. And I love this. It says, they set him down in the midst before the face of Jesus. That's the Greek. Sometimes I just feel like I need to throw myself into the midst in front of Jesus. Sometimes I need to pray for people. And in my prayers, in our intercession, we can take people and we can set them in the midst in front of the face of Jesus in our prayers. Our intercession is so powerful. And Jesus shows that he is not only the Redeemer to forgive sins, he's the Creator. He heals the guy's body. He's revealing to them who he is. And then in chapter 6, verse 5, there's a guy shows up on the Sabbath day, again, with a withered hand. That's bad news. That means he cannot earn a living. He can't do anything. He's doomed. And he heals him on the Sabbath. And he says to the guy, get up, come forward. And the guy came up, came forward. And they said, I wonder if he's going to heal on the Sabbath. That's against the law. And after looking around at them, he says, stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored. and the enemies were filled with rage because Jesus healed on the Sabbath. So I'm just trying to show you just some of the things that Jesus does as he comes, and he's just beginning his ministry. He's touching and healing. He healed every kind of disease. Everybody was bringing him their sick. He healed every kind of everything. When we're beginning to look at the Gospels, when I say the Gospels, what I'm talking about are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those 4 books. They're like biographies about the life of Jesus. Like you could read many different authors who write a book about William Booth. They're not the same person. Their books aren't going to be exactly the same. They're talking about the same person. They have 4 different ways of telling the story of Jesus' life. So that's what I mean when I say the Gospels. These are books about good news, and Jesus is the good news. So when we're looking at those, and we're going to learn about Jesus, we want to remember with accuracy who it is that we're reading about. And so I just want to review things that we've talked about this week, because it's super exciting to read about who he is and what he's doing when you remember who this guy is who's walking around doing these things. Who is he? Remember, Jesus is God. He's not God's little helper who came for a while to do some stuff for God. He is God. He is Yahweh. You know, in the Old Testament, when you read the word Lord and it's all capital letters, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, that's his personal name. It's not his title. And the Jews were afraid to say it. Yahweh, we say it. But Jesus is Yahweh revealed. That's who he is. So the Old Testament is critically important. Oh, can I just tell you, I was so grieved the other day. I was reading the war cry, and I saw this advertisement. Don't tell anybody I said this. I saw this advertisement, and it said, a Bible made just for salvationists, the New Testament. And you can find many stories in this particular version, made just for salvationists. Who told them that we don't care about the Old Testament? I never allowed my children to own a New Testament. No way, Jose. You do not understand the New Testament. You can't understand Jesus without the Old Testament. Why did Tyndale House Publishing Company think the perfect Bible for salvationists was one without the Old Testament? I'm not happy about this. He is Yahweh revealed. He's the second person of the Holy Trinity, incarnate. Jesus is divinity. He's the one true God, and he's wed to our humanity. Jesus is the perfection of beauty. Forgot I had slides. He is 100% divine, 100% human. There has been a terrible separation, a terrible cosmic rift, a wound, a separation from God. We talked a lot about this. And in our sinful state, in our sinful nature, we're separated from God. We are fractured, distorted, deluded, broken, shattered human persons. And that's our predicament of all humankind. In our sinful state, we're separated. We're just broken. Jesus is the healing of the separation. In his own being, he has brought humanity and divinity together. He is the reconciliation. Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Remember when he said that? So what is the law in the Old Testament? We talk about this. It's the portrait of who God is. It's a beautiful picture of his ways. It's the description accurately of his wonderful character. And Jesus fulfills the law perfectly. He is righteousness and peace joined together. He is truth and faithfulness kissed. Don't you love that? That's from Psalm 85. And then it says he fulfilled the prophets. who are the prophets? If Jesus fulfilled the prophets, who are the prophets anyway? That whole big section of Scripture. These are the voice of God, speaking truth, clarity, warning, potential and promised judgment, and hope to God's people. And sadly, the history of the church, if you've ever read the Old Testament, is they didn't listen. The people of God didn't listen. And that means they didn't obey. The prophets are an early incarnation of the voice of God. Incarnation with a small I. God's voice, they are God's voice through a human personality within a distinct space and time. That's what the prophets are. And Jesus Christ is the Word. He is the voice that the prophets were crying out. The prophets, those books are so beautiful, so powerful. When I first came to Christ, that was what got me, was the book of Isaiah. So Jesus is that Word. He is that voice. So it's good to know what they were saying, right? So Jesus said in Matthew 5:17, he said, I've not come to abolish, but to complete, to fulfill the law and the prophets. So at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, the one who is the reconciliation of our destruction, he states that he's come to complete and to fulfill everything that the Old Testament was about. He's bringing into integrity in his own being the character and nature of God with human nature. That's who Jesus is. That's who this one is. He is our salvation. It's not something he does for us, not just an experience we have. Jesus is our salvation. And he is the portrait of what we will be when he puts his life into us. When Jesus births his life into us, he is the portrait of what we can be like. And he heals. He writes his law on our hearts. And that's what salvation is his life in our life. And that is healing. It's a healing of our whole persons, our soul, our hearts, our spirits, our bodies. That's what holiness is God coming into our lives and restoring us back to what he intended. So, here we have God himself, the creator of the universe. He's come to church, and he's teaching Sunday school in chapter 13. So it's on the Sabbath day. And this is also very cool to think about. The Sabbath, on the seventh day of creation, that's the climax of creation. Because what happens on that day is that it says God, Genesis 2:1-3, God blessed the seventh day. He made the seventh day holy. He rested on the seventh day. Well, nothing is holy unless God is actually there, unless he's actually present. And so what happened on the seventh day of creation was that God himself, he created the world, and then he comes from outside the world, transcendent, eternal reality, and he enters time and space. He comes zooming right in through time, and he comes into space, and he is with us. The seventh day, the Sabbath, it means every time you read the word Sabbath in the Bible, it means God is here. He is with us. It's the first Emmanuel, God with us. So, here Jesus is on the Sabbath day, and he's teaching Sunday school, and it just seemed to be such a wonderful spiritual highlight for everyone. And you think about it, if this is God on the Sabbath day, what do you think he's going to do? He's going to heal. He's the healer. He is the one who's come to make us whole, to heal our wounds, to take our shatteredness, this disaster, this horrible situation of our human condition. He is going to heal on the Sabbath day. That's what he comes to do, to make us whole. So it says that He was there in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and then in verse 11 it says there was a woman there. Now there was a big crowd, but there are no crowds for Jesus. There are no crowds for Jesus. He sees special, unique, individual persons. He sees us. He sees you. You're not anonymous. You're not lost. You're not one of those people you feel like you'll never be missed. That's not true with Jesus. He sees you. He knows us personally. And this woman had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. And perhaps in this room right now, some of us, maybe myself, have been crippled by some kind of a spirit that has left us bent over. What do you think are some spirits? Some kind of a crippling thing that could cripple a life? Go ahead and just holler out something you can think of. That's anxiety. Yep. Addiction. What'd you say? Pressure? Anger. Yeah. Fear. Resentment. Pride. Yes. Yes. Thank you for saying that right out loud. Yes. Sleeping with whoever we want, whenever we want to. Yeah. All kinds of things. Physical conditions resulting from anxiety. Like we talked about, can't get on an airplane. Crippling, eh? I have so many, when I was a young adults pastor, I had half my young adults couldn't go to college. Super smart. Because they were so anxiety filled that they could not bear the thought of being in a classroom. Can't sit in a classroom for fear that people would look at them. They might have to speak. Never will get a college education. So sad. Grief can cripple us. Having been abandoned, self-interest, a lot of these you said, shame, resentment. Oh man, that will do you right in. Blaming other people. Self-pity. I have a really good friend, beautiful, gorgeous woman, super talented. She's my age. She's not married. And I don't get it. And she has completely crippled her life from self-pity. She just sits in her spot in her home and feels sorry for herself because she wasn't treated well here and wasn't talked to properly there. It is an absolute paralysis. It is the most heartbreaking thing. All kinds of stuff. Envy. Sexual identity confusion is crippling. I have so many precious friends, I would call Q, I guess. Just so struggling, trying to figure it out, just paralyzed. Their lives are just, they're so wonderful, so gifted, precious, amazing people. I love them so much. And they're just crippled. Can't figure it out. So many messages. And she was bent over, and she couldn't straighten herself up at all, it says. We have a guy in our core, I think he has osteoporosis or something. Seriously, he's at a 90-degree angle. He's like this. And I think about him every time I read this, because all she could see, all he can see is the ground, his feet. And he has to really hurt his neck to look up and speak to us. But think about it. All she could see is the dirt. Like, think about what Bill talked about last night. Just a vision of the dust. That hopelessness. Can you imagine what it felt like to be hurt? And, you know, one of the definitions of sin is being bent, isn't it? Not straight, not as intended. And I was reading my devotions this morning, and I read this in Psalm 38. It says, there's no soundness in my flesh. There's no health in my bones. My iniquities are gone over my head. As a heavy burden, they weigh too much for me. My wounds grow foul and fester because of my folly. I am bent over and greatly bowed down. I had never noticed these verses in relationship to this precious woman, but this is a real thing, being bent and unable to lift ourselves up. I go about mourning all the day long, and it goes on and on about this agony. And then it says, I hear all these messages in my head, but I'm not going to listen, I'm not going to listen. And verse 15 says, because I hope in you, O Lord. You will answer, O Lord my God. Do not forsake me, O Lord. Do not be far from me. Make haste to help me, O Lord, my salvation. It's his name. And that is really good news. But perhaps some of us in this room are crippled by some kind of a spirit whose voice is playing in our head, or something we've gotten ourselves messed into. We've gotten involved in something, or we've just coddled that resentment thing, or unforgiveness. I tell you what, we will not go through with Jesus with unforgiveness in our hearts. It's a wall, it's a barrier. For some of us, in our minds, we have playing this never-ending, slow drip of a voice of accusation and disqualification of your life. Do you know what I'm talking about? And I believe that is the enemy. Jesus said it was. Later in this chapter, he said that she's been crippled by the enemy, by the devil. And he can whisper horrible things in our mind. I was talking to a friend recently who told me all of her life she had this, her mother was abusive. All of her life. I mean, she's one of the most fabulous people I've ever met in my life. She's mind-boggling. Who knew? All of her days, this voice saying, "You're so ugly. You're so stupid. You will never really be loved by anybody." All of her life, you will never do anything that matters. And she shared that with a pastor. And he said to her, "That's the devil." And he said, "Do you know Jesus has authority over that voice in your mind?" He said, "That is not even you saying those things in your mind. That's the enemy. He has crept into your brain and your mind all of her life for decades and decades." And that pastor had the insight to realize that this was a demonic thing in her. And she's this precious, beautiful, godly woman. She has a phenomenal ministry. You all have phenomenal ministries. Do you have this crappy voice in your head lying to you, bringing you down? And this man prayed over her, and just very quietly, "Jesus has authority. You get out." And she told me it's been 1.5 years, not one word from that voice. Not one word. I am not like that pastor. I don't have that kind of insight. I don't know how to provide for you in this room that kind of ministry in myself. But Jesus is here. And he has authority over your lives. He has authority over my life. I think I have those voices in my head. There are certain things I hear all the time. He's here. He is the King. Jesus said, do you remember when those Pharisees said, well, you're casting out demons by Beelzebub? He said, oh, really? He said, let me tell you this. I cast out demons by the finger of God. And because I do, the kingdom has come. The King is here. He is the King. I love that song. I requested it. He's the King of our lives. And he sees us. This precious woman did not have the wherewithal, did she, to go to him. She was just like hiding in the crowd. She didn't know how to get his attention. How could she? She's like this. I find so much joy in that because Jesus saw her. He sees us. We don't know what's going on in us, do we? He sees us when we're bent, when we're not whole. This is the thing about that woman, and it applies to you all. She was there. Can you imagine how hard it was for her? Like this, trying to get through the crowd to get to where he was. She did it. You got on an airplane. Yeah. You are here. You all came. Nobody commanded you to be here. You came to this weekend because you are hungry for holiness. That's a big deal. That'll change your life. You make decisions like that, that'll change your life. She was there. She went to where Jesus was. She didn't stay home. She was near him, and she was open to receiving. And that's you. It's every single one of you. Every single one of you are open. I've sensed it. I've seen it in you. You've made yourself available to the King of your life. And Jesus saw her in verse 12. He called her to himself. Oh, rat. We just like to stay anonymous. He does this over and over and over in the Gospels. He says, get up. Come forward. Oh, man. Can I just stay in my seat and kind of think about things? No, he says, get up. Let's do something here. Let's do something about this. And I'm not really sure what all that's about, but when he calls to us, we must come. What if she had been too freaked out? What if she'd run away? What if she'd gone home? What if she'd gotten angry? What if she had said, this is too hard, this is too exposing? What will everybody think? I've been an officer for 25 years. What are they going to think if I go to the altar? It's pride, right? So we must go to where he is. He must get our attention, and then we must give him our attention. There are two parts to that, I think, and we must respond. And then he speaks over her. He speaks over her, and his word speaks over us. We talked about his word. His voice is so powerful, so powerful. And he speaks incredibly life-changing, powerful, encouraging, hopeful things over our lives. Let's read this together. I remember reading Isaiah when I was first figuring out what Christianity was. I read this, so I just want to share it with you. But let's read it aloud together. Now thus says the Lord your Creator, and he who formed you, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they will not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be scorched, for I am the Lord your God. You are precious in my sight. You are honored, and I love you. Do not fear, for I am with you. I was that invisible kid in my family. Nobody knew I was even alive. And I read this, and God says, you're mine? I want you? You're precious? No one in my entire life had ever told me I was precious. Jesus did. And he's saying that over all of our lives. He speaks powerfully over us, and he says, you are set free from your infirmity. And that really spoke to me, because infirmities are things that just, we don't really choose them so much. They're just kind of like the fact I cry all the time or whatever. And my personality, I can be a total jerk. I am just strong, and I just think I should say whatever I think. That's not my personality type. That's a jerk. And Jesus can set us free from our personality type. If our personality type is hurtful, he can set you free from that. He can. I love that. And so this is a Sabbath. It's a time for setting free. The Sabbath Jubilee is a time of setting the captives free from bondage. And Jesus saw her, he called her, he spoke over her, and then he touched her. He touched her. Philippians 3:12, I love this. Not that I've already obtained holiness or that I have become perfect, but I press on, that diligence, so that I may lay hold of that for which also I was laid hold of by Christ. Remember that image of him reaching hold of us? He has laid hold of us. He does that to everyone when he saves us. He reaches in and grabs us out of the mire and the clay. He's a rescue swimmer. He reaches in and rescues us out of the pit and out of the raging waters. And he did that for her, and he will do that for you. He will touch the places of your life that are broken and diseased. And immediately she straightened up and praised God. And you cannot avoid the immediatelys in these stories. And so that's why I have a lot of trouble with all this evolution stuff. This is the Creator. If he can't quite handle making the world with his voice, how in the world is he going to heal me? Well, I think it's probably going to take him 7,000 years for her to straighten up. It was immediate. It's the Creator of the universe here. And sometimes it takes a long, long time for the fullness of healing. But man, sometimes he can heal something. And I want to let him do that with his voice and his touch. And then, of course, the synagogue officials, I call them the holiness people. They say, don't come. Please, just stay back. Live your life acting, just be a fake. We like fakes in church. Don't bring your problems in here. Lived in Jackson, Mississippi for 23 years. You ever seen The Help? That's where I lived. And we had it down. Go to church. If you're really broken, if you're dying inside, you get bigger hair and more red lipstick. And when you go to church and someone says, hi, honey, how you doing? Say, fine. And so in my discipleship group, we learned to say, fine or what? We learned you have to push back through the fake. And there's this thing about the light. And if we in church and in the context of our small groups and our accountability in confidence and safety can bring our horror into the light, Jesus can begin to heal. And we can't let what we think is proper and what everybody might say keep us in the dark, because once we speak it, once we tell somebody, he begins to set us free. So, did you have a homosexual encounter while you were in college in the dorm? Bring it in the light. Somebody told me that not long ago. I was like, so? That doesn't define you. That does not define you. I'm sorry that happened to you. That stinks. Thank you for telling me. Bring it in the light. And it was like all this load lifted off, carrying this horrible, dark stuff. No, just bring it in the light. Are you addicted to porn? Well, I'm sorry to say, welcome to the club. Half the people are in our culture. So let's not pretend. Let's not play games. Let's get it out in the open and get down to business and let Jesus heal all our stuff. The Most High stoops to where we are, no matter how bent over we are. He comes to us, and he will bend right down so that he can look us in the eye. He is El Roi, the God who sees me. He's the same one who, in Genesis 16, found Hagar despairing in the wilderness, just passing the time, having totally given up, waiting to die. Anybody been there? And he comes to us, and he shows us the way to drink of the well of life. He knows what we're made of. He knows our frame. He knows that we're dust. He knows the degree of our pain and our thirst. He knows how desperate we are for relief. He knows everything. He knows what has caused us to be dying of thirst in the first place. Sometimes we don't even know, do we? We don't know. He knows the spirit from the evil one, the enemy of our souls, that cripples us, lies to us, has bound us, bent us over. He knows all about it. It's not a mystery to him. And he is the God who sees and calls us to himself. We will never know or understand what's going on in our own thinking, what cripples us. We won't know the spirit that binds us. We have no light in ourselves. Within our own thinking processes, our light will probably manifest itself as making excuses or blaming someone else. And that's not light, that's darkness and delusion. Psalm 43:3 says, "Send forth your light and truth and lead me to your holy hill." Only Jesus is light and life. John 1 says, "In him was life, and that life was the light of humankind." That light shines in the darkness. The true light gives light to every person. Only God, the Holy Spirit, can reveal to us the things that are binding us so that we can give them to him. And he stoops to our weakness, as mighty as he is, and he fills us with power and life. And that is hope, that's joy, that's the beauty of holiness breaking in, alluring, calling to us toward his love. He says in Jeremiah 30, he says, "I will restore you to health, and I will heal your wounds." That's a promise. It's a promise for all of us. He says, "Behold, I am the Lord of all flesh." Is anything too hard for me? No, nothing is impossible for him. Nothing is impossible for him. He can do anything. He can do all the things we cannot do. And so we have this ache in our lives sometimes. Sometimes we just feel dead. We don't even know why. There are circumstances, there are choices that we have exposed ourselves to. And some things are just sorrows that have landed on us. And they make us just feel like we're in a wilderness. Many of us have expressed already this week these untimely deaths that have lodged themselves in as a part of our story. I've heard deaths of children, parents, spouses. And sometimes our singleness can be so disappointing and so painful. And let me tell you this, sometimes our marriages can be so disappointing and so painful. And we're living in that. Our children can be ungrateful, disappointing, demanding, disrespectful, cruel. Does it sound like I know this from experience? Neglectful. They can lose their way. They can break our hearts. Or perhaps we don't even have children. And we would love to have children. We love them so deeply in our dreams that we can smell them and feel them, only to continually be reminded that to our natural senses, these babies that we love are just a vapor in our imagination. I cannot imagine the pain. We yearn to have a child that would go astray so we could worry about them. And then think of the orphans. Millions of orphans in the world who just would love to have a parent. Can we bring these together? Any parent to take them into their lives and love them. And some of us have loneliness that is so gnawing. I am so lonely, I have told some of you, because I travel so much, I cannot figure out my life. I cry. Someone says, "How are you doing?" Usually I just start crying. It is gnawing and it's ravenous. It eats our soul out. And we're too ashamed to tell anybody because then we look pathetic. Most people in our country are so lonely. And most of us carry about in our lives things, I call them unspeakables. And we bear them in our beings. We had healing services at our church that we pastored before we joined the Army. At least once a year, we would do a healing service. And people would come to my line. We'd have lines and lines of people. And people would come to my line, and they would share with me. They would whisper in my ear, "They're unspeakables." No one knew them now but me. And I would go home and cry. And I was bearing their unspeakables. Jesus bears our unspeakables. Abusive relationships that we live in and we cannot escape, and no one knows. We have fearful diseases. We have devastating personal financial situations. No one knows. Maybe we have the approaching death of someone in our family. They're our rock and they're sick. Shame because of our own sin. We don't talk about it. Shattered shame because of the sin somebody else has committed against us and we've never told anyone. Dysfunction. How about this one? Dysfunction within our family system. It's awful. And everyone thinks we're the coolest altogether family. That is very hard. But we can't tell anybody. Or, this is one, the millions, primarily men, but probably women too, young men, who live within this unholy trinity of addiction to pot, porn, and video games. You all know what I'm talking about. Most young men you see, this is their life when they go home. They may work really good jobs, wear a tie. Every night they come home to pot, porn, and video games. And no one knows. Addictions to drugs, to Netflix, to the news, to gambling, and some people are addicted to someone else's spouse. And some of us have chronic depression and bipolar disorder because we've been betrayed and abused so much we can't think, and injustice, and it goes on and on. But Jesus knows. He knows. And he has taken these unspeakable, unbearables that we carry, he has taken them into his very life. And he can reach in with light and truth, and he's strong, but he's tender. And some of this stuff is so deep, it's a stain. And there's something more that is needed than forgiveness. These things must be cleansed by his purifying fire, the breath of his mouth. And every single one of us in here can be set free. We can be set free. We can be healed. We are created for healing. I'll tell you, one of the strongest, it's just frightening to think about the sense of abandonment that so many people have in our culture. A sense of being unwanted. There's a precious young woman in my life who, this is an awful story, but it's a true story. She's actually named after me. She was prostituted out by her own mother. Her mother pimped her out. And when her perverted captor, who was her mother, and her rapists lost their taste for her because she had outgrown the age that they preferred, she was so old, because now she was 4 years old, her mother got rid of her and discarded her into the foster system. She has 3 siblings. The mother kept them, but got rid of her. And Jesus reached in and rescued that baby girl from hell, using the arms of a foster mother. And that family adopted her and took her into their family when she was 4. This little girl, she's now 18. She is going to suffer, I can't even imagine, terrible, debilitating ways because of the perversion and the torture she endured as an infant. She's been to countless psychiatrists and counselors. But the most severe, and the psychiatrists have said this, the most severe, the most disabling wound is having been abandoned by her mother. That's the piece she can't get over. Not having been raped repeatedly as an infant. Can't believe those words just came out of my mouth. She's crippled by this attachment disorder, having been abandoned, unwanted. You think about the Salvation Army. That's what we are. We're a place where everyone is wanted. Can I tell you my own life, my own story on feeling unwanted? I have never experienced in my life the healing of being unwanted as much as I have since I've joined the Salvation Army. It's the Army that's made me feel like I belong for the first time in my life. That's what we do. We take anybody and we love anybody, right? Because we're like Jesus. It's huge. That's not a small thing. It's the biggest thing. And I really believe that when Jesus was on the cross and that cry of dereliction where he said, my God, why have you abandoned me? I believe because he endured every kind of thing humans have endured. He's endured fatherlessness, poverty. He was a political refugee, all those things. He endured what it was like to be abandoned because so many humans have endured it, and it's unbearable. It can't be borne. It's too painful. But Jesus is our bearer. And he has a wound. He has a wound. He has lots of wounds. This wound right here, This is my place. For years and years and years, that side wound is for the deeps. This is where the things that are mind-bending, unbearable, this is where you go. And it's my secret place where I go to him, and he hides me there, and he covers me with his hand, and he can, in that place, he can heal that death knell that tries to drown us in psychosis and depression and self-pity, and he invites us to come into him so he can bear us. Some brokenness, I don't know if it can be healed till glory, but we can survive and be healed in the holding of him in his wounded side. And when he invites us there, it's where he holds his precious treasures. That's what's there. It's a place for you. It's a place for everyone you know. And when we're there, he speaks things. He whispers in the secret place. Over and over in Scripture, we hear that. He whispers in the secret place and he says, "You are mine. I am your portion. Arise, eat, get up, walk. You are not alone. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I have a call on your life. I have a purpose for your life. I am the source of your ministry." He and his wounds bear and heal all our wounds, all our diseases, everything we've gotten ourselves into, all our pain, all our sin, all. He's here. The King is here. And you have come. He's inviting you. He may be saying, "Get up, come forward." And he wants to speak over our lives with words of freedom and wholeness. He sees you. He knows you. He loves you. And there's power in his hand, in his touch, in his voice. And he can set you free.